So welcome everyone to updating the Australian University Register of Academic Language and Learning Centres and Units. Just to give an overview, we'll talk about the current Australian university context. Alex is going to tell us about the history of the AALL University Register. Amanda will speak about the updated survey results, and we'll talk about the reported changes in 2020. And Alex will finish up with a comparison from one of the first academic language and learning registers, university registers from 10 years ago. So then we'll have some time for sum up and questions and discussion. So if you have questions, just hold on to them until the end. So in the Australian higher education context, all colleagues would be well aware of this, but for our colleagues overseas, we have had a widening diversity of students, and these students are definitely in need of academic language and learning support. The equity framework recognizes non-English speaking background, low socioeconomic status, regional remote areas, Indigenous peoples, people with disability, and women from non-traditional areas such as STEM. So there is a precarious balance between the disciplinary curriculum and generic skills that many academic language and learning centers or units focus on. Sally Kift writes about the multitude of challenges and wicked problems that vex our sector's international pursuit of educational quality and maintenance of national standards through declining government funding. And some of this may sound familiar to our colleagues from other countries. Glyn Davis, who was the Vice Chancellor of University of Melbourne, wrote, "Public universities are pursuing deeply entrepreneurial international markets to expand international enrollments." Now we know that there's been a great transition from the impact from COVID, and this impact has been worldwide. We know that everyone's undergone some impact, and we just want to acknowledge that this was not a reason for this grant project to take place, but rather it became quite complicated and challenging to collect the data because of what was happening. So everyone swiftly pivoted to online delivery. Universities Australia in February reported 1.8 billion lost revenue compared to 2019. The sector was estimated to lose 2 billion in revenue in 2021. At least 17,300 jobs have been lost. It's not really clear if casuals are included here, but it is not expected that they are. So the loss of jobs has been much, much higher. Since 2020 began, interesting to note that 18 of 37 public uni vice chancellors have announced their departure. The gender gap in work hours has grown by 20 to 50%, and many universities are undergoing current restructures, redundancies, and reforms. Last week in Australia, the new federal budget was announced with very little funding for universities. So this is the scene, and I'm now going to turn over to Alex to talk a little bit about the history of the Australian database.
Okay, right. Whoops, there's nothing on my slide, Sally. There we go. Okay. This goes back to quite some time ago, but before I go into the details, let me remind you that there are approximately 40 universities in Australia, and the enrollments have gone from about 1 million students back in 2006 to 1.5 million in 2019. Now, back in 2006, we had approximately 24% of international students in Australian universities, and that's increased to 30%. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but that is the largest percentage of international students in English-speaking countries of international students in the student population. So that's quite considerable. Back to the history, back in 1993, which was about a year after I started working in this field, I created the first contact list, which was aimed at creating a national network of academic language and learning educators so that we could have some kind of ideas at a national level, who was doing what and where and so on, and how many people were doing it. Now, since then, that was the year before we had our first national conference, the Language and Academic Skills Conference, as was called in those days. It became a very popular way of communicating across the board, across the Australian university sector. Now, the table was updated annually from 1994 to 2015 until the 2020 research project, which we're talking about tonight, was created. And part of this table, I think, was a large reason why we were able to create the Association for Academic Language and Learning, AALL, in 2005. It was quite easy to do that because we had a fairly good grasp on who was doing what, as I said before, who was doing what and where and how they were working and so on. So to create the association, to set up the association was a fairly easy task. So that's the background of the current project that we're talking about tonight. And I'll hand over to Amanda from here to talk about some of the results of the 2020 project. Over to you, Amanda.
You'd think I'd know how to unmute myself, wouldn't you? Okay, so I'm just talking about the basic outcomes and the methodology. We got ethics, human research ethics approval for this, and we did the survey online. We collected most of our data that way, and only had to chase up a few people. But it was a Qualtrics-based essay. Survey, and we had questions which where you actually just basically selected your response out of a range of options, and we had some open text options too under other. We had 42 universities which involved these many enrollments, you know, 1.5 million enrollments, and it involved 412 FTE all stuff. Okay, so we go to the next slide. We found that the support activities that were being undertaken, as you can see, online was already a predominant way of delivering support, and that was even before COVID. And the consults, general workshops are your bread and butter. And we also see at the lower end that the credit units where maybe people took a credit-bearing course or credit-bearing topic that may have actually helped them enroll, maybe or be part of a prerequisite for them to enroll into a degree. There was a small amount of that activity too. And you can see, actually, interestingly, the peer-to-peer was used quite a lot. Okay, so I think those numbers fairly speak for themselves. If we move on to the next slide. So obviously the online, because I think that's something that's probably grown the most in the last 5 years. You can see that the workshops and recordings and just delivering in an online format has been one of the predominant way to do the all support. The quick guides are like your facts, and the sort of handouts that you might have seen on like photocopied pieces of paper, they were put online as well. And you'll see that where workshops may have been in person, they were already, and I could say they were already moving into a online meeting space, but that definitely accelerated too. You can see at the lower end, proofreading, it was actually the least amount. And I think that's, and Alex or Sally, you can comment as well, because we use Studiosity. A lot of universities have uptaken Studiosity as where students can run their papers through and get some proofreading support that way. So that may have affected how many people are actually doing proofreading now and checking students' essays, because I think that's been pushed onto Studiosity as a service. Okay, so I want to leave enough time for questions afterwards, so I'll go through these fairly quickly. Now, the skills emphasis, naturally academic writing, came out as pretty important. In fact, it was nearly 100%. Study techniques is another bread and butter activity. Presentations, so that might have been oral presentations or, you know, managing things to do with PowerPoint and so forth. And actually, as you know, from our high percentage of international students, English language skills is one of the key areas of support. Technology may not have been in the domain of this kind of support, because often that might be pushed out to technology or IT support. It might be under student systems rather than academic language and literacy. Okay. And you may notice as well, so before we move on, maths and stats. Yeah, that's something else that has sort of always been there, but you'll see that it seems to be focused on as well. So it's not just language, but also the numeracy aspect. Okay.
Amanda, I just wanted to make a point about the technology. I think that hasn't really been the bread and butter or a key focus of academic language and learning, but it seemed recently it's come up to, well, it's 40% there, but it seems it's come up quite a bit higher than ever.
Yes, I would agree with that, and I'm wondering whether it might not have been to do with, for example, the Turnitin software and how to use Turnitin, and also how to manage some of the aspects of Word or PowerPoint, and that may have actually be a reason for that. What do you think, Sally?
Yes, I would agree, but it's something we could maybe discuss with everybody at the.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, as you can see from the student groups, again, this is the most of the academic language and literacy support is any student. It tends to cover all groups, whether it be undergraduate or postgraduate, whether it be people undergoing high research degrees, or right down to the students who are just starting. So you can see that the general academic focus is there, and the student groups being supported tend to indicate that. Yeah. As Alex noted before, with overseas students being 30% of the population. It's sort of, that's also was captured before with the English language support, among other things, and probably to do with like academic literacy, like the genre and text types and other type of support that the international students will need, given they're transferring from one education system and orientation to the Australian one. Cool. Again, we can talk about this after. Hand it over to you, Sally.
Thanks, Amanda. We decided to leave the last survey question number 10, open-ended. And we asked all the managers, how has your all program service changed recently? And most of the responses arose around two key themes. The first theme was restructure. And some of the points that people made, these are quotes from those surveys. The first one, we had a name change, went from student learning support, and there was some comment there about the stigma attached to student learning support, as if it was remedial, as if it was for dumb students or, less intelligent. And they changed that then to Academic Skills Center to try to have a more positive approach to academic language and learning support. And that person said so far, everyone was happy with the change. Back onto restructure, the second dot point there said, somebody said they lost 50% of continuing staff capacity. They had enlisted the third-party provider service, which was in fact Studiosity, and the work unit was awaiting another restructure. So 50% lost and another restructure. Another manager said, we've been integrated into the library. Another one said, another major restructure imminent, not clear about management plans for all provision. There was a review conducted by the provost, but the review has not been released yet. So everyone was feeling a little bit uncertain about that situation. Another person commented 30% reduction of student-facing staff in the current restructure. All student-facing staff had been moved from continuing staff to fixed term on 2-year contracts. And someone else said, lots of restructuring and redundancies, both voluntary and involuntary. There's a change of headship. There are increased layers of management. So this is just a snapshot, a flavor of a majority of the comments, and restructure was definitely a key theme. The second key theme was service changes. And people commented they've mobilized all their services online. Online was now the new norm. Somebody else said they had online versions of all previous face-to-face offerings. There was an emphasis on creating videos in some unis. There was a greater focus on digital literacy development. And I think that goes back to the point Amanda and I were speaking about in the graphic, where digital technology had seemed to increase recently. Many people commented about the external provider, Studiosity, which had been appointed to help students with feedback and proofreading and comments on their academic writing. Somebody did say there was more engagement with academics. They do embedding workshops and have sessions that work into the classes or lectures. So that was quite an interesting comment. And somebody else said, with the loss of international students, now the focus is on first-year transition support. So without international students, academic language and learning was focusing on first years. Another interesting comment was made. Someone said, all our staff are now academic to enable teaching in academic programs. So the point of being academic was important for teaching into the lectures and the classes and the academic degree programs. So those are just some of the comments that came out of the final survey question. How has your service changed? And restructure was a major theme, and service changes. So that's a sum up of our survey snapshot, and I'm going to turn over to Alex now to speak about how this compares with previous database surveys.
Okay, well, it's a very interesting final point that Sally made for me to pick up on is from 2005, we included statistics about academic versus professional academic language and learning staff. Now, I know they're not called exactly the same in other countries. We call academic people who have tenure, who have academic conditions and so on. And we call professional staff people who have general status staff, not with the same kind of tenure, with the same kind of leave entitlements, sabbaticals, and so on. I think they're called differently in Canada, and it's called slightly different in UK as well. But what I want to say here is that back in 2005, we recorded in this kind of database approximately 250 academic language and learning staff, of which 60% were academic. In other words, with a higher status. I'm not kind of differentiate between the work they're doing, because the work we're doing, both academic and non-academic or professional staff, is exactly the same. But that has moved to 2020. In our last database, we recorded approximately 420 academic language and learning staff, of which less than 35% were academic. That's a considerable drop in status. What that means to universities is that an academic staff member costs them literally 2/3 more than a general or professional staff member. Okay, so what we also included from 2007, the database table included, quite importantly in the mind of many people across the country, academic language and staff to student ratio in Australian universities. And that has moved from 2007, it was 1 to 2,900. I'll comment on the numbers in a second. It went all the way down to 1 to 2,500 students. But in 2020, it has increased to 1 to 3,600. And I mean, let me say here, these are just statistical averages. They're not what we call optimal staff to student ratios. We worked out over the years, or rather I worked out over the years, way back when I was doing the table on my own, is that approximately a 1 to 1,500 student staff ratio was an adequate number at a university for staff to look after the students and cater for their academic language and learning needs, both local or the domestic students as well as international students. So 1 to 3,600 in the current survey is extremely low. And that is in a context where the student enrollment, the population of students in Australian universities over the past 10 years has increased by 33%. The number of international students, as you know, has increased from 25 to 30%, so an increase of 5%. And the number of staff of academic language and learning staff has decreased by 8%, which means that the staff of student ratio has decreased by 47%, which is enormous. So we've lost, in the context of the figures that Sally was talking about before, we've lost an incredible large number of staff given the student to staff ratio. Okay. So the reason why I started the table and why I continued it and why the project was picked up is that the statistics used by the statistics available through this database is used by academic language and learning staff to justify to their university management how to increase academic language and learning staff numbers. And that is, I think that's a very important factor of why this project is so crucial, well, definitely in the Australian context, and why we kind of actually would be encouraging people in other countries to do something similar, because you can see that, you use the table and you go and talk to your management and say, look, I mean, the university up the road or around the corner is employing so many staff, and we've got very, very good examples of that in Australia here, as you will be able to see when you have to look at the details of the table, is that we should increase the number of academic language and learning staff at our university to be in line with what they're doing at the University of X, Y, or Z. All right. And my last dot point is that you can have a look at the table, which is available at this website here. So you can all see all the details of the 42 universities with contact names, with all the details of what Amanda talked about in her diagrams, in her graphs and all of that. And that's all summarized in the table that you can see there. And as I said, we would like to encourage you to do something similar in other countries. Should you wish to contact any of us, myself or Sally or Amanda, to ask questions about it after this discussion tonight, we are more than welcome and more than happy to do that. All right, so I'll hand back at this point to
Sally. Can I just interrupt
Sally,
briefly?
Certainly, go for it now, Amanda.
What we presented tonight on these slides were actually a snapshot, a really quick snapshot, just so you can see some of the results on graphs. But if you actually want the full details, we would not have been able to cover all the details on the tables in this talk tonight. So I do strongly encourage that you go to that. We wanted to just give you a taster of the findings. So Sally, if you'd like to take it.
Yeah, so as Amanda said, it's just a bit of a snapshot, a quick flavor of what's happening in Australia and Australian universities, particularly in our sector of academic language and learning. So I'd just like to open up now to questions or discussions. Anybody like to ask anything or comment? And you can find the database table here in our website under resources and publications. And what I was speaking about earlier, the all conference, there's more information about that here. You can click on that and they are asking for papers. So anybody who joined us late, they have had a good response. I think there's over 50 abstracts submitted already, but they would like a few more. And they've opened that up. The conference is going to be online. So, and if the time zone doesn't suit you, they would also welcome recorded messages. So let's just see, does anybody want to make a comment or ask a question?
There is one in the chat from Lindsay that says, this is such a rich data set. Did anything you gathered especially surprise you, given the assumptions that professionals in Australia might have about what and how services are offered?
What do you think?
So, yeah.
I was a little bit surprised about the technology increase. It's not exactly academic language and learning, but I think it's an essential skill. So that was one thing I felt.
I knew there was drops in numbers and in staff, but I hadn't realised how much of the academic language and learning work had been shifted across the Studiosity. So that was a bit surprising for me, though perhaps I shouldn't have been so surprised.
Can I go back to the technology one? I don't find the technology so surprising, given that technology is access to language. So many students, particularly over the last year and a half, have been using technology to access language, and they've needed to get that kind of support to access the language, to kind of submit their assignments, complete their assignments, and so on and so on. So that's not so much of a surprise. Yet it is, when you look at the graph there, it is the lowest type of service that we provide in Australia compared to all the other ones.
It's true.
Yeah, and there's another question about the regional subgroups and different types of universities. Again, if you go into the website, you'll see that each university has its own percentage. So this is broken down by university as well. And you can actually compare directly each university and what their special balance is, what their particular balance is. But maybe, Alex, did you notice anything with the regional subgroups or different types?
Yes, I can comment on that. We have in Australia something that's called the Sandstone University, which are the oldest and the most prestigious universities in Australia. University of Sydney, University of Melbourne, University of Adelaide. I mean, they usually have the name of the capital of the state they're in. They are, and they have always been the universities that have on average, the lowest number of academic language and learning staff and staff to student ratio across the board. So you have newer universities and regional universities who seem to be catering far better for their student needs than the more traditional ones. And I'm not saying there is more need at the less prestigious universities than at the prestigious ones. The need is very similar, because apart from international students, there are also a whole group of local students who are in need of academic language and learning support, who are not getting it at the more traditional universities. So, but that's been a shortfall over the past, ever since I started the table back in 1993.
I know that's also, it's interesting because I also would like to comment on the range that was with the ratios, because you know how we talked about the ratios. So for example, one university had a ratio of 1 to 375 students, right? And I believe the highest one was 1 staff to 14,000 students. So the range was also quite big. And you'll see at the Sandstone universities, they do tend to occupy the larger, the bigger student, the lower student ratios to staff. And, you know, one staff member might be, you know, catering for 5,000 students, so above the average. So it was interesting. I was surprised by that range, and, you know, how it's, I guess the only one there was University of Canberra had 1 to 904, which might have been the exception. But yeah, what Alex said about that, Sandstone universities is definitely very important to note. And they also, they tend to have more international students too, don't they, Alex?
I think
Sally?
higher percentages of
Yeah, high percentages. So
Yes.
it's interesting that they have less support, but they have high percentages. Yeah.
Of international students, that's correct.
Yeah, of international students. So you'd think that, you know, there might be more support just because of the change of the education system as well as the language.
Yeah.
So I could just comment because Southern Cross University is one of the regional universities, regional network universities. And we do have a much higher than sector average of those equity groups I spoke about, lower socioeconomic, mature age students, and so forth. And they often do seek help. And I've just finished a study on one student in particular tried to seek help 75 times in the year, whereas most students seek academic language and learning appointments maybe 3 or 4 times. They get it and they move on and they transfer those skills to their next assignments, and they're pretty right. But it's interesting.
Can I also add one comment here, is that some universities recorded a lower number of academic language and learning staff for the very simple reason that they've actually managed to integrate quite fully the delivery of academic language and learning support and services and assistance within the faculties. And that is not quite accurately reflected in the table that we've developed at this time. It's something that we may kind of have a look at for the future. And that requires fewer staff, because compared to having workshops that teach, you know, academic language and learning skills out of the disciplinary context, compared to delivering it within the faculties, it does require fewer staff. So that may be one reason why some universities have lower staff than they used to. I'm not sure. I'm not quite sure. That's the research project to be taken up from here.
Also, a question that was asked was research focused versus teaching focused universities. I don't know if this question comes from within Australia, but something that we're moving to, that Texas is moving us to, is we will eventually have research focused and teaching focused universities. And while some universities will have a greater research income, and they may, I wouldn't necessarily, I mean, while I may say there are more heavily research based or research income based universities versus teaching based universities. Sally, maybe you could answer this. I believe that our universities in Australia generally are expected to do both research and teaching at least until, what is it, 2028? I think the new definition of a university will be rolled out, which will be based on research versus teaching.
I don't know the exact year, Amanda, but I have heard that teaching is going to be greater focus, but money will go to research, but it has to be more commercial based.
So at the moment, though, our universities in Australia are expected to do both at this particular point in time. Yeah.
Can I suggest we ask for more questions, if there are any more questions from the people who joined us today?
Yep.
Anna did ask about wellbeing support in the chat.
Yes, I saw that. I don't think we had any feedback on well-being. I don't recall that in the data.
Yeah.
You, Amanda?
No, we didn't ask about that because that's often handled by a counselling service or
Usually counseling.
yeah, people are
yes.
professional. That's yeah, it's different.
Any other questions or comments from Scotland or Canada or England, New Zealand?
Ah, the future.
Carmela, yes. The answer is yes. Very bright. Of course. No, we are worried here. We're concerned. There's been clearly a degradation of our profession in the sense that we have lost a considerable number of staff across the board. So we're looking forward to the future with optimism, but the last couple of years have not been very positive.
Sally and Alex, do you mind if I maybe mention that point that we talked about, I think about a week or so ago, where I just feel that, and it's been in the literature as well, the push onto the subject lecturers in the discipline to provide academic language and learning support. So it becomes part of the business of the disciplines and every lecturer, every teacher, rather than treating all as an area of specialisation. I think there's been a bit of a push onto the lecturer being a jack of all trades and having the ability to teach language, teach literacy, teach aspects of academic language and learning, rather than seeing it as something that actually needs some level of qualification. Yeah, and I'm wondering whether that's playing a part.
Can I pick up on Eloise's question here, Eloise Bickett? Curious about how positively studiosity was viewed among the response. That was not part of our project. We didn't ask that question.
No.
We all have personal views about studiosity, and we all look forward to studiosity not replacing what we do very professionally, but that was not part of the project. So we have no data on that. I think there's a different project running on that, being completed on that. You commented that might have reduced.
Siri, there's quite a big comment. Why don't you just put your microphone on and speak?
Thanks, Sally. I was just thinking about the topic of well-being, and that was such a big feature of one of the Canadian ICALLD presentations. It was really great. But the Connect, Inspire, Share series has touched on that a few times. So I put the details of the next session, which really focuses on belonging and how staff across the university, and it's really led by all, are trying to promote well-being and belonging amongst students. And also there's a recording of a session from last year that was all around promoting student well-being and motivation.
Thanks, Siri. So Alex, you said having experienced how aggressively such firms protect their market share. Do you mean like Studiosity? I'm not sure what firms you meant.
I'm talking specifically about Parson View and the controversy they courted in the UK where they botched up the medical students' finals last year.
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, look, when I mentioned before that Studiosity is, I mean, Studiosity ticks a box, doesn't it? Okay. It hasn't necessarily replaced the need for proofreading, okay, and for proofreading support and teaching how to proofread your own work. But if you can just advertise that, oh, we've got this and that, and Studiosity also advertise that if you pay for a certain feature, you can have a live person do the proofreading and do a turnaround within 24 hours. you know, it's not the same, but it's a concern if the university feels that why would you invest in an in-house staff if you can just ship it off cheaper to Studiosity or Studiosity service. And that's just probably more of a personal opinion than something I saw in the data.
But overall, I agree with you, Alex. Cuthbert, yeah, that would be challenged equally aggressively by the companies who are trying to sell their product. Ursula Canton, notion of embedding. No, we didn't detail the question beyond that. I just know because in compiling the final bits of the database, I contacted people individually, and it seemed to be the explanation of why there were few people at universities, because we can't count them anymore because they're working within faculties. So, but that's again something that needs to be kind of drilled down into to kind of find answers to that. Dawn,
and the other thing too, Ursula, was people said they had been integrated into the library. They had been integrated into student services. So there was a lot of integration and trying to synthesize academic language and learning services with other student-facing services, which I don't think are necessarily always compatible, but that might be my opinion.
And also,
Dawn at Waikato. Yes, that's a common comment. Yes, I totally agree with you. Just wanting to interpreting their feedback. I mean, it's just a machine. It's just a machine service. Okay, so. But look, Studiosity seems to satisfy university management.
Yes, it does. It ticks a box.
Yep.
With
exactly.
The notion of embedding. So, for example, I do all work, but I'm actually a nursing lecturer. Okay, so I'm not even hired within the central system, and I'm not even managed by the central academic language and learning system. I'm actually hired as a nurse lecturer, and I'm not a nurse, by the way. I'm a linguist. So it's actually, you're right, that it is actually, it's difficult to capture the staff who've been embedded, particularly if they've been embedded so comprehensively like I was. So yeah, but it's not typical really. It's quite an atypical case. We did capture the staff as they would have been captured in the 2015 survey. So we kept the same sort of methodology. We're looking at mainly centralised staff. However, if the centralised staff are pushed out to the faculties, they would be captured. And that was the idea. And the other thing is that if we have, it makes the numbers comparable. And we actually invited, I believe, Sally, everybody who was all staff, all member to participate. Is that right? We sent it out to everyone.
Yes.
Yeah. So everybody got the chance to do it if they were a member of the association anyway, not just the managers of all units.
Hui Fang Lee at the University of New England is confirming what I just said. Yes, of course. Well, we have to stand up with management to them, to the Studiosity mob.
Hui Fang, I've published about that in JOL, Journal of Academic Language and Learning, and we found one of the unexpected findings of the study was that students came back to academic language and learning staff for more discipline-specific feedback, whereas the feedback from Studiosity, they said, was much too generic and very unhelpful. So they came back to us after, and students often said, we use them for the first draft, and then we come to academic skills to check and be sure we're on track. So it's interesting.
Yeah, Hoi Fang, I would agree with that too. We found that Studiosity, students submit their assignments, they get picked up on things and they go, how can that be? Studiosity approved it. So,
okay, I'm just responding to Lindsay Heggie in Canada. good luck with that, Lindsay. I'm more than happy. We are more than happy to give you any hand, any advice, any kind of support that you need about how we went about doing it here in Australia, of course.
And Alex is the expert because he was the originator of the first database.
It was good fun. Yeah, I think it was a good way to go about it. I'm just going through. All right. Well, Lindsay, you've got my details somewhere, I'm sure. Did we have our addresses, our email addresses on the slide somewhere?
No, I didn't do that, but they are on the all website, Alex. So Alex is listed as senior counsel, Lindsay, so you can contact him through the
Oh yeah, go have a look at the
website.
AALL website, and I'm sure you'll find all of us there.
Okay, well, I think our time is up. Thank you, Julia. Yeah, so if anybody has anything else to comment, last chance.
And yeah, I'll say I look forward to meeting all of you, all of the people who attended tonight at the online conference in November. Be fantastic to see you there again.
Don't forget to put in an abstract, and if it's not in your time zone, they will consider recordings. So please put something in. And
It'd be great. It's a great opportunity to kind of internationalize beyond the way we have internationalized so far down in our little island on the southern hemisphere.
And thank you so much, everybody, for attending. We really appreciate your participation.
Thank you.
Stop
Thank you.
recording.
All right. Over and out.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.